Hair loss after 60 is not caused by aging alone. It happens when follicles are pushed beyond their biological recovery margin. It's happening because your hair follicles are being damaged every single day by habits that look harmless on the surface. Music. And the longer those habits continue, the more difficult that damage becomes to reverse biologically. Right now, for many women over 60, hair isn't just thinning slowly. It's coming out in the shower, it's left behind on the pillow, it's thinning in patches you never had before, and what makes this terrifying is the feeling that it's completely out of your control. Most women are told the same thing. This is normal aging, nothing can be done, just accept it. That belief is wrong, and believing it is exactly what allows the damage to continue. After 60, your hair follicles enter a fragile biological state. They no longer recover easily. They no longer tolerate stress, inflammation, or nutrient shortages the way they once did. When a follicle shuts down at this stage, it rarely regains function within normal biological limits. In most cases, that loss becomes permanent. This is why time matters. Every week you continue the wrong habits, more follicles slip past the point of recovery. And once enough follicles cross that threshold, isolated shampoos, supplements, or single treatments can no longer override the biological environment driving the loss. In this video, you're going to see exactly what's happening beneath your scalp. I'm going to break down 6 serious biological mistakes that drive hair loss in women over 60. They start with mistakes that seem minor, even responsible, and they build toward the ones that cause the most irreversible damage. Each mistake compounds the one before it. Miss one and you missed the full picture of why your hair is disappearing. Music. Before we go any further, pause for a moment, comment your age and where you're watching from. Then subscribe to this channel right now because the final part of this video covers music, the mistake that determines whether your follicles remain functional or pass beyond a recoverable biological stage. Most women never hear this part until their follicles are already operating beyond their recovery margin. Let's get into it before more follicles are lost. After 60, your hair follicles are no longer resilient structures. They become biologically fragile. The easiest way to understand this is to stop thinking about hair as something cosmetic and start thinking about follicles as living tissue. Each follicle is a tiny biological unit with its own blood supply, oxygen demand, nutrient needs, and inflammatory threshold. When you were younger, those follicles could tolerate abuse. You could wash your hair frequently, you could style it with heat, you could go through stress, sleep poorly, eat less protein, music, and your follicles would recover. After 60, snorts, that recovery margin collapses. At this stage of life, follicles behave more like fragile gardens than durable machinery. When conditions are right, they can still produce hair, but when the environment shifts even slightly in the wrong direction, the damage accumulates fast. Reduced blood flow, lower sebum production, higher baseline inflammation, music, hormonal shifts after menopause, declining nutrient absorption. All of these changes happen quietly, but together, they make follicles far more sensitive to stressors they once handled without consequence. This is where many women get trapped. They continue the same routines that worked in their 40s and 50s, assuming consistency equals safety. Biologically, that assumption is no longer valid. What matters now is not whether a habit used to be safe. What matters is whether your follicles can tolerate it today. And here is the critical distinction you need to understand. Temporary shedding is not the same as permanent follicle loss. Shedding happens when follicles shift phases but remain alive. Permanent loss happens when follicles shrink, scar, or shut down completely. After 60, repeated stress pushes follicles toward that permanent shutdown much faster than most women realize. Once a follicle crosses a critical biological threshold, shampoos, supplements, or isolated treatments no longer reliably bring it back online. This is why timing is everything. Intervening early can preserve follicles that are still alive but struggling. Waiting allows them to slip into irreversible failure. The purpose of this video is not to scare you. It's to show you exactly where the biological line is drawn and how close many women already are to crossing it without knowing. Because from this point forward, every mistake compounds the damage from the one before it. After 60, your scalp does not behave the way it used to. One of the most important changes almost no one talks about is the sharp decline in sebum production. Sebum is not dirt. It is not something your body accidentally produces. It is a biological protective layer designed to shield your scalp, calm inflammation, and keep hair follicles functional. When you were younger, your scalp produced enough sebum to tolerate frequent washing. Even if you stripped some of it away, your body replaced it quickly. After 60, that replacement no longer happens. When you wash your hair every day or even every other day, especially with clarifying or volumizing shampoos, you are removing a protective layer. Your scalp cannot regenerate fast enough. The result is not cleanliness. The result is exposure. Your scalp dries out. Microinflammation sets in. Hair follicles become irritated and chronically inflamed. Chronically inflamed follicles lose the ability to consistently produce healthy hair. That tight, itchy, uncomfortable feeling you notice after washing is not normal. It is not a sign your scalp is fresh. It is a stress signal. Music. Each time you feel it, your follicles are operating in a hostile environment. Over time, that inflammation does not stay superficial. It penetrates deeper. Blood flow becomes impaired. Follicles weaken, shrink, and eventually stop producing hair altogether. This is one of the most underestimated drivers of long-term follicle loss in women over 60. The solution feels wrong at first, which is why so many women resist it. You have to wash less. For most women at this stage, washing twice a week is enough. And when you do wash, the shampoo matters more than ever. Sulfate-free moisturizing formulas are not optional here. They reduce sebum depletion instead of accelerating it, allowing the scalp environment to stabilize rather than inflame. This goes directly against decades of clean hair conditioning. But biology does not care about habits. It responds only to conditions. If you want to preserve the follicles that are still active, this change becomes biologically necessary. And before we go any further, listen carefully. If this already sounds uncomfortable, that's a warning sign. The next mistakes are far more damaging, and missing them means missing the full reason your hair is disappearing. Subscribe now if you want to protect the follicles that are still alive. Because once we move past this point, the damage accelerates fast. After 60, the structure of your hair shaft changes in ways most women never see, but their follicles feel immediately. Each strand becomes thinner. The protective outer cuticle breaks down more easily, and the internal protein structure loses its tolerance to stress. This is why heat becomes dangerous at this stage. When direct heat from blow dryers, flat irons, or curling tools hits aging hair, it triggers a process known as thermal degradation. The proteins that give your hair strength and elasticity, primarily keratin, begin to denature. Once that happens, the damage is permanent. Keratin does not regenerate. It cannot be repaired or restored. This is not like dryness or frizz. It is structural collapse. What makes this mistake especially destructive is that the damage does not stop at the visible hair shaft. Heat travels. Repeated exposure allows that damage to move down the strand and reach the follicle itself. Over time, this heat-driven stress causes follicle miniaturization. The follicle shrinks, the hair it produces becomes thinner and weaker. Eventually, it may stop producing hair altogether once biological tolerance is exceeded. This is why women who heat style regularly often notice a slow but steady loss of density, not just breakage. By the time the thinning becomes obvious, the follicle damage has already been happening for years. If you are blow drying every time you wash, smoothing with a flat iron, or curling with heat, even once or twice a week, you are accelerating this process. The correction is simple, but it is not optional. Heat frequency must come down. For most women over 60, once a week is the upper limit. On other days, hair needs recovery time through air drying or heatless styling methods that do not push follicles toward shutdown. When heat is unavoidable, protection is mandatory. A proper heat protectant creates a barrier that limits protein breakdown. Using heat without one at this stage is direct follicle stress. Temperature matters just as much. Most styling tools are set far too high by default. What younger hair can survive, aging hair cannot. Lower heat settings reduce thermal damage without sacrificing results. This is not about beauty routines. It is about biological tolerance. And once that tolerance is exceeded, follicles, snorts, respond by shutting down. After menopause, stress does not land on the body the way it once did. The same pressures you managed in your 40s now trigger a very different biological response. The center of that response is cortisol. Cortisol is not just a stress hormone. After 60, it becomes a system disruptor. As estrogen and progesterone decline, cortisol gains more influence over inflammation, blood sugar, sleep, and circulation. When cortisol stays elevated, even at moderate levels, it creates hormonal chaos that hair follicles are extremely sensitive to. This is where the hair growth cycle breaks down. Hair does not grow continuously. It moves through distinct phases: a growth phase, a transition phase, and a resting phase. In healthy conditions, the vast majority of follicles stay in growth. Chronic stress changes that balance. Elevated cortisol pushes follicles prematurely into the resting phase. They stop producing hair, but they don't fall out immediately. Instead, the shedding shows up later, often 6 to 12 weeks after the stress spike. This delayed response is why so many women are confused. The stressful event is long past, but suddenly the hair starts coming out in handfuls. This pattern is known as telogen effluvium, and it is one of the most common causes of sudden diffuse hair loss in women over 60. What makes this especially dangerous is duration. Short-term stress can cause temporary shedding. Prolonged stress changes follicle behavior. When cortisol remains elevated for months, follicles do not reliably return to the growth phase. Some remain dormant, others weaken, shrink, and eventually shut down. The stress does not have to be dramatic. Financial pressure, caregiving, chronic worry, poor sleep night after night. Low-level stress counts because cortisol responds to repetition, not intensity. At this stage of life, stress management is not emotional self-care. It is a biological intervention. Lowering cortisol requires daily physical inputs that change hormone signaling. Consistent sleep restores hormonal rhythm. Moderate movement improves circulation and reduces inflammatory load. Controlled breathing shifts the nervous system out of constant threat mode. Without these inputs, topical treatments, supplements, or diet changes cannot reliably protect follicles from continued hormonal stress. The hormonal environment remains hostile. If stress stays unaddressed, hair loss continues even when everything else looks right. This mistake is often invisible, but its impact is cumulative. And once follicles adapt to a high cortisol environment, reversing that adaptation becomes increasingly difficult. By the time most women reach their 60s, medications are no longer occasional. They are part of daily life: blood pressure drugs, cholesterol-lowering statins, antidepressants, especially SSRIs, thyroid medications, blood thinners, hormone therapies. Many of these drugs have one thing in common: hair loss is a documented side effect, but it is rarely emphasized. From a medical perspective, controlling blood pressure or cholesterol takes priority over cosmetic music concerns. That logic makes sense clinically, but biologically, your hair follicles still pay the price. What makes this mistake so difficult to recognize is timing. Drug-induced hair loss does not usually happen immediately. Music appears 3 to 6 months after starting or adjusting a medication. By then, the connection is no longer obvious. The shedding seems sudden, unexplained, or blamed on aging. At this stage of life, multiple medications compound the effect. Each one adds a small amount of follicle stress. Together, they can push follicles past their tolerance threshold. Supplements create a similar problem, often in the opposite direction. Many women take supplements, assuming that more is better, but excess is not neutral to hair follicles. Too much vitamin A directly accelerates hair loss. Excess selenium can do the same. High doses of vitamin E can interfere with normal follicle signaling. When supplements overlap, especially when a multivitamin is combined with individual nutrients, overdosing becomes easy without realizing it. Hair follicles respond to imbalance, not intention. This is why blind supplementation after 60 music is dangerous. The correction here is not to stop medications on your own. That would be irresponsible. The correction is awareness and review. Every medication and supplement needs to be examined with hair loss in mind. That means working directly with a physician or pharmacist to identify which agents may be contributing and whether alternatives exist. Music that reduce follicular stress. For supplements, testing comes first. Blood work reveals what is actually deficient and what is already excessive. Only then does supplementation make biological sense. At this stage, guessing is not harmless. Delayed onset shedding means the damage is already underway by the time you notice it. If this factor is ignored, external hair care routines cannot reliably compensate for the internal signals driving follicle shutdown. By this point, we are no longer talking about surface-level habits. We are talking about what is happening inside your body quietly every day. Mistake number 2 is living with an undiagnosed or poorly managed health condition that is destroying your hair from the inside out. After 60, the most common culprits are thyroid dysfunction, iron deficiency, low vitamin D, post-menopausal hormone imbalance, and autoimmune activity. These conditions rarely announce themselves clearly. Fatigue gets dismissed as age. Joint pain gets blamed on wear and tear. Hair thinning gets labeled normal. Biologically, none of that is neutral. Hair follicles require a precise internal environment to stay active. When thyroid signaling slows, follicles lose metabolic drive. When iron is low, oxygen delivery to the hair matrix drops. When vitamin D is insufficient, follicle signaling weakens. When hormones fall out of balance after menopause, the growth cycle destabilizes. Music autoimmune activity can directly target follicles without obvious warning signs. The most dangerous part is this. Standard lab tests often say normal, but normal is not the same as sufficient for hair. A thyroid value can sit at the low end of normal and still music shut down follicles. Iron can be technically acceptable, while ferritin remains too low to support growth. Vitamin D can avoid deficiency while remaining inadequate for follicular function. Hair does not respond to averages, it responds to optimal conditions. If these internal issues remain unaddressed, external solutions cannot consistently override the internal signals driving follicle shutdown. Now we reach mistake number 1, the most common, the most underestimated, and the one that ties everything together: protein and nutrient deficiency. Hair is not an accessory, it is a protein structure. Keratin is built from amino acids, and your body cannot manufacture them out of nothing. After 60, appetite often drops. Protein intake declines, absorption efficiency falls, dietary restrictions increase. When resources become limited, the body makes a decision. It prioritizes survival. Muscles, organs, and metabolic stability come first. Hair comes last. This is not a malfunction. It is biology. When protein intake is inadequate, or when key nutrients like iron, zinc, biotin, and essential fats are missing, hair growth becomes optional. Shedding increases, regrowth weakens, density disappears. This is why hair loss accelerates and becomes increasingly difficult to stop under these conditions. Not traumatic, not sudden, just relentless. If the internal supply chain stays broken, follicles eventually shut down. Everything you've heard so far leads to this point. Protecting hair after 60 requires internal conditions that allow follicles to justify staying alive. At this stage, one thing should be clear: your hair is not failing you. It is reporting what is happening inside your body. After 60, hair loss is not a cosmetic issue. It is a biological signal. A signal that follicles are under sustained stress, deprived of support, or pushed past their tolerance threshold. Ignoring that signal does not make it go away. It allows the damage to continue quietly. Intervening early changes the outcome. Waiting narrows your options. Hair operates on a biological clock, not a cosmetic one. What you see today reflects decisions made months ago. This is why 4 to 6 months is a realistic window for meaningful change, not days, not weeks, but long enough for follicles to respond if they are still alive. Accuracy is what determines whether intervention still has biological leverage. Shampoos do not override hormones. Supplements do not cancel stress. Good intentions do not replace adequate protein or blood flow. Knowledge only matters when it leads to action. If you recognize yourself in what you've heard, this content was made for you. And if you don't act on it, the outcome does not stay neutral. Follicles continue shutting down whether you're ready or not. If you want to protect what you still have, subscribe to this channel now, not later. This channel is built for people who take their health seriously, not for casual viewing. Share this video with another woman who is losing hair and still being told it's just aging. She deserves the full picture before the damage becomes permanent. This information is not comfortable, it is not gentle, but it is accurate. And accuracy is what gives you a chance to intervene while intervention still matters.